Welcome to Legalize Negligence. Today I'm going to do a short video on my own this morning. I want to address Senator Yarborough's request that people send him new information, new things to look at. Travis and I have been going over the Senate Judiciary Committee meeting from earlier in the week on Monday, and I have not seen a single person mention the Department of Health or ACA as far as a way to hold doctors accountable for their malpractice. What I have seen them do is talk about striking a balance, and the opponents to Senator Yarborough's bill think that there should be a balance, that if the people are able to hold doctors accountable by being able to take them to civil court and sue for non-economic damages, then the doctor should have some kinds of protection. Well, if you look at that through the eyes of going to civil court or even criminal court for that matter, let's say you have a drunk driver, and it would be like arguing, well, what are the drunk driver's protections? You know, he broke the law. So what protections does he have? And those protections are due process. Under the Fifth Amendment and under the 14th Amendment, he has due process protections. And the doctor would have the same protections if we were able to take him to civil court without caps. He still has due process protections. So this balance that they're talking about makes absolutely no sense to me, but they want to talk about striking a balance. And Senator Yarborough has come up with a new term, threading a needle. Well, I suggest that you're threading the wrong needle. You keep wanting to rethread the same needle that the past 33 legislatures have threaded, and I suggest you look at something different. And that difference is doing something about the Department of Health and ACA not addressing these issues when people file complaints on a doctor or a nurse. You may say that some get through and some do. Sabrina Davis's case was a very rare example of that happening, where she was able to get the doctor before the Board of Health, the Board of Medicine, and they fined him $7,500, and he continues to practice. So what I thought I would do is I watched a couple of videos last night that I had in my archives where doctors are coming from other states and they're allowed to practice in Florida. And I've used the term in some of our podcasts about the Judiciary Committee meeting where I referred to Florida as a second chance state. So I'm going to stay quiet for about 5.5 minutes, and I'm going to let you watch this news report. It's actually two parts. This is going to be part one, and then I'm going to play part two, the follow-up to it. And just sit back and be prepared to have your senses shocked.
Welcome back to CBS This Morning. An exclusive CBS News investigation reveals many doctors who cause their patients harm are not facing discipline, and some appear to be repeat offenders. According to national statistics, less than 2% of doctors account for more than half of all malpractice payments, meaning a small number of physicians are responsible for a big problem. For our year-long investigation shot just before the pandemic, Jim Axelrod went to Indiana to examine what many in the field told us. State medical boards are protecting doctors instead of patients.
I'd never seen that much activity in a room after a surgery. Something medically just wasn't right.
Jeremy Payne is describing spinal surgery his 46-year-old mother, Regina Bruce, had in 2008 after she'd been rear-ended in a car accident. At the same hospital, Dawn Bell's father, Thomas Cox, went in for a spinal fusion. During the procedure, Dawn told us the surgeon had a problem.
During the surgery, he got sick.
Who got sick?
Dr. Swabeck.
Were you and your mom looking at each other like, what is going on here?
Yes. We're like, this, are you serious?
Both operations were conducted by an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Steven Swabeck. The surgeries left Jeremy Payne's mother with her left leg paralyzed and Dawn's father with nerve damage.
And he proceeded probably to have 7 more surgeries trying to correct the nerve damage.
What is your feeling as your mom and your dad aren't quite right after surgery?
You're second guessing what's just happened.
Thomas Cox and Regina Bruce both reached medical malpractice settlements with Dr. Swabeck. Neither fully recovered. Both turned to opioids to manage their pain and later died.
It's pretty bad that people can get away with what they have in these situations.
People?
Doctors.
Doctors are licensed by state medical boards, panels made up almost entirely of fellow physicians. We spoke with more than 100 malpractice lawyers spread out over all 50 states and heard the same thing over and over. Medical boards do a good job weeding out doctors who have broken the law. But when it comes to malpractice, when doctors injure their patients, medical boards often look the other way. We dug through state and court records and found that Dr. Swabeck lost his surgical privileges at 2 Indianapolis hospitals after his practice fell below the standard of care, and concerns were raised about his honesty and truthfulness. Swabeck lied about losing privileges to the Indiana Medical Board. Then there are the malpractice suits.
Dr. Swabeck has settled 5 suits over more than a decade, the most of any orthopedic surgeon in Indiana in the last 20 years. I don't know if you're aware of this or not.
I had no idea.
Are there dangerous doctors practicing medicine in Indiana?
Absolutely.
Tina Bell is an attorney in Indianapolis. She's been involved in cases against Dr. Swabeck, but agreements in court keep her from discussing him.
We have almost like this cloud of secrecy around the medical profession.
Is it possible to get into trouble and still maintain your license in Indiana?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Bell has worked both sides of the street. She spent more than a decade representing hospitals and insurance companies before moving to represent patients as a malpractice attorney.
Is the medical board protecting patients or protecting doctors?
I would say protecting doctors.
You're telling me a doctor can make a mistake 3, 4, 5 times and it doesn't affect their license?
Those are the doctors that worry me, and those are not the doctors that I'm seeing getting reprimands from the medical licensing board. So there is a gap where they're falling through the cracks somehow here in Indiana.
We wrote to Dr. Swabeck asking for an interview, but never heard back.
My name is Andy Bass. I'm a producer for CBS News.
So our producer found him where he's now practicing, in Florida.
Really, I don't have any comments to make about any of these questions, no.
You had a disciplinary action here in Florida about operating on a wrong hip that we saw?
No,
Is it?
it's not true.
That's not true?
No, sir.
We got our information from the Department of Health, where records show that since relocating to Florida, Dr. Swabeck has been sanctioned 3 times, including for operating on a patient's right hip instead of his left. His penalty? A fine of $7,500.
As you might imagine, we had a bunch of questions for the Indiana Medical Board. After declining our request for an interview, we caught up with the doctor who serves as the chairman of that board. You'll want to see that tomorrow morning.
And we'll look forward to showing it
Sure
to people,
do.
Jim. That's a great piece. Jim, any advice for people who want to check out their own doctor ahead of a surgery to know if there are any problems?
Yeah, that's actually one of the central points we get into tomorrow morning, how difficult that actually is.
All right. Looking forward to that, Jim. Thank you.
Very well played, Jim. When
Yeah.
when Dr. Swabeck says to you, I don't know where you got your information, you go, well, I'll tell you exactly. What
We got it from the Department of Health.
from the Department of Health.
Yeah.
It's very scary stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Nice job.
All right.
Okay, that was part 1. Now I'm going to play part 2. But I want you to take note that this guy was in Indiana and got in trouble in Indiana, had his license revoked, and he moves to Florida. And the Department of Health is not only the department that regulates their licenses and issues their license, they're the ones that regulate the doctors, and the doctors have to go before them if there's a complaint against the doctor. So I know if I put my seal of approval on somebody and then there was a complaint about that person, it's kind of like, well, I've put my seal of approval on them, so I'm speaking for them. So let me go ahead and play. This one's a little bit longer. It's 6.5 minutes, but it's very important to listen to what CBS has to say about this.
In part 2 of an exclusive CBS News investigation, we're taking a look into why doctors are often not disciplined for causing their patients harm. State medical boards, which are responsible for licensing and disciplining the doctors, have just one goal above all else: to keep the patients safe. But our year-long investigation revealed that is not always happening. Our investigative team talked to more than 100 malpractice attorneys in all 50 states, and they heard the exact same thing. After doctors harm their patients, medical boards often look the other way. Yikes. This morning, Jim Axelrod shows us why the public often has little idea who these doctors really are.
She was paralyzed and had what they call drop foot, which is basically where your left foot just hangs down. It does nothing.
When Jeremy Payne's mother, Regina Bruce, had spinal surgery in 2008, her left leg was left paralyzed. She settled a medical malpractice suit with the surgeon, Dr. Steven Svabek, who has a long history of problems in Indiana.
It's pretty bad that people can get away with what they have in these situations.
People?
Doctors.
Doctors are licensed and disciplined by state medical boards, panels made up almost entirely of fellow physicians.
What folks have to realize is that the medical board is not a substantial barrier to them being injured by a physician.
Dr. John Hall spent 25 years practicing pediatric anesthesia and critical care. Later in his career, he went to work as the executive director of the Mississippi Medical Board.
Most medical boards are constituted of physicians who are political appointees, and that is an inherent conflict of interest.
The people who are policing the doctors have an interest in protecting the doctors.
Absolutely.
But after Dr. Hall pushed the Mississippi Medical Board to be more aggressive in disciplining doctors, he found himself out of a job.
I believed in the mission of the medical board, and I thought this is a place where I can do this and do some good.
You were pushing too hard.
Absolutely.
Do members of the general public understand everything they could understand about the doctors who are treating them?
Oh, absolutely not. Robert Oshel spent 15 years at the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, where he worked with the National Practitioner Data Bank, a federal database used by hospitals to keep track of bad outcomes by doctors. Oshel says there's a problem. The National Data Bank doesn't share doctors' names with the public.
If doctors' names were listed in the data bank, would it save lives?
Sure, because there are physicians who have very bad records who are still practicing.
Oshel scoured the data bank and turned up an alarming fact. Less than 2% of doctors are responsible for more than half of all malpractice settlements.
It's a very small proportion of physicians that have caused the bulk of the problem. And even worse, only 1 in 7 have had any action taken against them by any state.
Meaning most of the bad doctors are still practicing.
Right.
Kind of like whenever you buy a car, it has a Carfax. It's almost like a doctor should have a doctor fax.
Jeremy Payne's mother was operated on by Dr. Steven Svabek. Google him, and you won't find anything about his list of malpractice settlements in Indiana or the 3 sanctions Dr. Svabek received more recently from the Florida Medical Board.
Really, I don't have any comments to make about any of these questions, no.
The Indiana board was made aware of Dr. Svabek's problems in Florida, so we traveled to Indianapolis for the hearing.
If you had a chance to speak to the board, what would you say?
How many more lives are you going to allow him to ruin?
When Dr. Svabek's case came up, we were surprised to see that not only was Dr. Svabek not present, he didn't even have an attorney there to represent him. The board fined Dr. Svabek $1,000 and moved on. We asked for an interview with board president, Dr. John Strobel. They didn't make him available. So when the board took a break, we tried to get some answers.
I'm Jim Axelrod with CBS News.
Okay, yeah.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
Unfortunately, I can't.
Why can't you?
We have a, hey, Mike.
Yeah. But you're the chairman of the board, and I would like to ask you some questions about Dr. Svabek's case.
Mike, can you direct him to the right person?
You're the right person, sir. You're in charge. Are you telling me the buck doesn't stop with you? Now, the mission of the Indiana Medical Licensing Board is to protect the public. Is the sanction just given to Dr. Slavek consistent with that?
Dr. Strobel didn't respond to a single question we asked.
He had nowhere to go, including the escalator. Jim, I'm going to get nervous next time I see you approaching with a TV crew. But after all this reporting, what have you heard about why the medical board seems so reluctant to pull the doctors' licenses when they know they're not doing a good job?
Gail, right. So that's the question, Gail, that we kept asking throughout our reporting. Why, with a system in which 2% of the doctors account for 50% of the malpractice awards and settlements, why isn't there more vigilance on the part of everyone in the system, insurance companies, medical boards, doctors, to target the bad actors? And over, the experts told us the same thing. When you have doctors policing doctors, there's a certain amount of reluctance built into that system to suspend or revoke licenses, and the degree to which there are positions reserved for non-doctors on state medical boards is the degree to which you will have some independence and autonomy on that board.
Boy, Jim, I have to say, we were all talking about your piece here at the table. We were really looking forward to it, and it certainly delivered. Tony, you touched on it yesterday. As a patient, do we just have to rely on the doctors to tell us the truth? Is that how it goes?
Well, it's like what the man said in the piece. He said there should be a Carfax for doctors.
If hospitals can track it, then people should be able to track it. And if somebody in Congress is watching this is definitely something to take up in legislation. That information should be public.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jim, I forgot to say thank you to you. So thank you, Jim Axelrod. But what do patients do if we're supposed to have a surgery? Just rely on the doctors to tell us the truth?
I think you're getting at something very important here. That National Practitioners Data Bank. Let's open that up so that you can check it out.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jim Axelrod.
Okay, there you go. I'm going to direct this next thing I have to say directly to Senator Yarborough, because I'm going to send him a link to this podcast when I'm done. You've heard what they said. This is nationally, and they implicated Florida directly in this. In every email that I have sent to you, I have pointed out that one of the biggest problems is the remedy that was left to us back in 1990 when subsection 8 was passed was that we had to rely on the Department of Health to take care of the negligent doctors. And I've said to you in these exact words, that is no remedy because the Department of Health does not do what the Department of Health is supposed to be doing. I'm going to tell you a very quick story about my mother. I'll keep it very brief. My mother died because a nurse was negligent and she left her fall prevention bed alarm off. Even after she was put on notice that the alarm had been turned off, she still left it off. I had her investigated by the Department of Children and Families because I started that investigation before she actually died. And when that investigation came back, they said that the nurse was not negligent. And I thought, well, that's insane. I've had time now to read the medical record and I see it. It's written right here in the medical record what happened. So it took me a while, but I finally got the Department of Children and Families, the director, Mr. Roy Carr. I got him to look into the case, and I was originally told by DCF that I could not appeal their findings. So after speaking to Mr. Carr, he said, well, if you have some new information, some new evidence, send it to me and I'll look at it. And I did. And he called me back a couple of days later and he said, you're absolutely right, Philip. He said, we dropped the ball on this one and we're going to reopen the investigation. And they did. And they found the nurse negligent on all 7 counts that they had looked into. So they completely reversed their original findings. They found her negligent. And here I sit 3.5 years later, and she has not been put on an abuse registry. It doesn't even show in the Department of Health's records that she's had anything done to her. She's still got a license to practice nursing, and she's still at the bedside handing out her version of patient care. So when I got the Department of Health or the Department of Children and Families to reverse that, that's when I opened my investigation with the Department of Health. I think the investigator herself did a very good job. She was very interactive with me. She asked me a lot of questions, but it went from her investigation, then had to be turned over to the prosecution unit. The prosecution unit reviewed what she put in. They thought it was substantial enough to turn it over to the probable cause panel. The probable cause panel at the Department of Health reviewed it and sent me a letter and said, we're going to close the case, and said, you have 60 days to file an appeal. So I wrote him back and I said, well, can you tell me why you closed the case? Because how do I know what to appeal if you didn't tell me why you closed it? If I miss some point of law, then let me know and I'll go and research that. The attorney wrote me back. She cited a statute and she said, govern yourself accordingly. And so I got in touch with her boss. We had some email exchanges back and forth. She said, go ahead and file your appeal. I did. The appeal was 45 pages. Only about 22 of those pages were the actual appeal. The other 23 pages were all the citations that I gave. So I sent it to her, and within an hour, she wrote me back and she said, we deny your appeal. We do not have to talk to you anymore. Goodbye. So Senator Yarborough, I'm going to say it to you again, face to face here in this podcast. The Department of Health needs to be investigated. You're seeing what the national news outlet said about the Department of Health, not only in Florida, but in other states as well. The Department of Health and ACA are not providing to the people what they were designed and set up to do. So I'm going to go ahead and get this video uploaded so I can send a copy of it to Senator Yarborough before they go into session on Monday. And feel free to share it with anybody that you think needs to see it, because this is important. We can continue our battle to try to get into civil court where we're able to put witnesses on the stand, we're able to provide evidence, we're able to rebut witnesses' statements, where we can't do that with the Department of Health. Once you file your complaint with the Department of Health, they take it over. They work behind closed, locked doors in secret. They don't provide anything to the public unless they find that the person has been negligent, and then the hearing becomes public. But as you'll see in upcoming podcasts that I'm going to do, well, like they said, less than 2% of the doctors are causing more than 50% of the malpractice, but only 1 in 7 of those ever gets disciplined. So you run the numbers. Figure that out. Find out how many doctors are in the state of Florida. Run the numbers. You deal with those negligent doctors and you solve this crisis. Placing caps on our ability to recover non-economic damages is not going to work. And I'm going to do a podcast later on that particular issue. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you learned something.